Welcome to ReFolKUs, a podcast that helps you find your focus to build a thriving creative career in the music industry. I'm your host, Rosalind Dennett. Hello and welcome to ReFolKUs. We have an amazing guest with us today, Dondrea Erauw. Dondrea has 10 years of experience as a music supervisor at Instinct Entertainment. She's originally from Caledonia, Ontario, and is joining us today from Los Angeles, California. Dondrea has had the opportunity to work on a number of films and television shows, such as Netflix's Spinning Out and Canada's iconic series Degrassi. She is a multiple award winner, and in April of 2021, she was presented with a Guild of Music Supervisors award for her work in the film The Cuban. Dondrea is also a singer-songwriter creating blissfully raw and vulnerable music that is influenced by her surroundings and Mother Nature, and she is the writer of Bye Bye Burnout, a newsletter that's about music, mental health, and how to live a more joyful life. Dondrea, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
Dondrea, your career in the music industry has taken a pretty amazing arc. You started as an artist and transitioned into working as a music supervisor. And now we find ourselves kind of coming maybe in a full circle moment of rediscovering your artistic side. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey in the music industry and what's led you to this moment?
Yeah, I started singing at a really young age and songwriting at a young age and released solo music and played in a band for a while and wanted to find a way to create a career for myself in this industry outside of just like touring and writing music. And I was always very obsessed with soundtracks. That sort of led me down the rabbit hole of music supervision. And I had no idea that that was actually somebody's job to, creatively find music and then also license it for TV, film, for any medium for that matter. And once I kind of found that out, I was like, this is something I want to do full time. I want to make soundtracks and work in the television and film world because I was always really influenced by TV and film growing up, and I was obsessed with soundtracks, and it became like a really influential thing for me in high school. That's sort of how I found new music and discovered artists, was from the shows and stuff that I used to watch growing up. And so I was like, that's something I really want to do, is be someone who can help other people discover new music. And what a cool way to go about doing that, working in a little bit of both worlds with TV and film, working with directors and producers and studios, and then also getting to work with, record labels and managers and artists. And it just seemed like everything I sort of wanted to do all together in one place. And I found Michael Perlmutter in Toronto, who runs and owns Instinct Entertainment, and he needed some assistance. And so I sort of integrated myself over there. Prior to that, though, I was working in music publishing, so I was like learning a lot about sync and licensing and royalties and stuff.
And you're connected with Fanshawe too, right? Did you?
Yeah. I went to the Music Industry Arts program at Fanshawe, and that's sort of where I was wrapping my head around what I wanted to do. Because at that time I was still playing in a band and we were playing a lot of shows in Ontario. And yeah, I met a lot of really amazing people there in my year and ended up working with a lot of them later, which was amazing. I mean, there's music industry arts people everywhere in Canada working in the industry. It just goes to show it's a great program and people are really excited about trying to enter this industry, and that's such a great place to go and do it. But that's sort of where I found out that music supervision was a career option or was a job that existed. So yeah, it's sort of where I started my journey of working in the industry. I was like applying to jobs like crazy after my first year, and nobody would obviously hire me even as like a summer intern because I hadn't graduated yet. But I was like super eager. And there's a couple teachers in our program who were like, there's maybe going to be 2 or 3 of you that are going to end up working in this industry, like after you graduate, FYI. So take a look at how many of you there are in this room and accept the fact that maybe like 2 or 3 of you are going to get a job. And I was like, I'm going to be one of those people.
That's incredible that you were one of those people. And how long did you end up working at Instinct?
I worked at Instinct for 10 years. Yeah, it was a really long time. It flew by, but it also felt like an entire lifetime all at the same time.
And you got to work for some pretty incredible shows. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the projects you worked on?
Yeah, I worked on a little bit of Degrassi Next Generation when I first started at Instinct. I was music coordinator on that. And then I moved into Degrassi Next Class, which ended up on Netflix. I also worked on a Netflix series called Spinning Out, which is like a figure skating sport drama, and a few films as well. So I worked on a film called The Cuban, directed by Sergio Navarrete, and The New Romantic, which was a really fun one for me, and a Canadian film called Firecrackers. So, I mean, over 10 years, there's a lot of projects coming in and out, but those are some of the ones that were really big for me. And Beauty and the Beast on CW as well. Like, that one was pretty wild.
Born and raised in Ontario, but you're currently living in LA. What prompted that move? And were you still connected with music supervision when you did that move?
Yeah, I was very much so. Very involved with Instinct still. I came out here for Grammy Week in 2016, and it was the first time I'd ever been to California. It's the first time I'd come to Los Angeles, and there were a lot of people I was working with for many years that I hadn't met in person. A lot of sync licensing folks and record label folks, other music supervisors I know that I just never really had met in person. So coming out here was something I really wanted to do. And when I came here, I was like, oh no, this feels like a place I need to be. This feels like a second home in many ways. And I love Toronto and Ontario. I miss many things about it now that I've been in LA, but I think I was like really ready for a change. And I was kind of back and forth for a little while and decided to come up with a business proposal for Instinct to try and set up ourselves out here in the States. Canada in general, and Toronto, Vancouver specifically, there's a lot of filming that takes place in Canada and co-productions that happen. So US productions in the States will go up to Canada and shoot for tax break purposes. So they'll get money back basically for filming outside of their own country. We were getting hired on a lot of those projects, and we wanted to get hired on more of them. So I think the idea of having feet on the ground here in LA and in Toronto was a really good idea. And so that was the plan. I moved out here quite quickly. I got my visa approved, and within like a month, I had sold all my things and moved here with 2 suitcases and figured it out. And it was a wild journey. And then obviously like a year into moving here, the pandemic happened. So, I mean, that's a whole chapter in itself. But
When did you decide to start writing Bye Bye Burnout? Was this after you decided to leave music supervision, or was that something in your head while you were still doing it?
no, it was not in my head at all. Nothing was in my head. Except for work, honestly. I mean, the journey throughout this whole process of, the Bye Bye Burnout newsletter came to existence because of the journey I experienced through moving here and through the pandemic, and taking a lot of time to self-reflect on how I spend my time on this earth and with people, and, how I identify myself and what I want my mark to be. And within all of that reflection, there was a lot of resistance, and I really struggled with trying to figure out who I was outside of my work. And I think the pandemic, as terrible as it was a total blessing in disguise for me at the same time, because it allowed me to really slow down and stop and feel things and process things. And in doing that, I realized that I was more burnt out than I could have ever imagined. I don't even think burnout was a word in my vocabulary while music supervising and working. I knew obviously what it meant. I knew what it was about. I knew that I was tired and overworked and exhausted and not really feeling myself. But I don't think I identified with having burnout until the pandemic happened. And that's sort of the journey I began and went through of, okay, I don't think this is healthy for me to keep living my life like this, and this is a big part of it. And who am I outside of this career? And that's where the journey began. I decided to leave supervision, which is still really crazy for me to say out loud. I left a career I spent 10 years building and learning and growing and getting quite good at because I needed it for my mental health. And that's sort of where the newsletter came to be and came to exist. Was I know I can't be the only one feeling this and going through this. And I decided to share on social media, the day I was leaving. I wasn't even going to do that. I was just going to do this in silence, sort of just step back and let the people closest to me know that I'm not doing it anymore. But I decided against it. And I said, if me opening up about all of this can help one person maybe identify or relate, and they can feel less alone, then it's worth doing this. And so that's exactly what I did. I shared this post that I was leaving the industry due to burnout. And I had so many people message me privately saying they're feeling the same thing. And I'm not just talking like music supervisors, because that was a big part of it, but I'm talking like other artists, like managers. I had a bunch of people in our industry world messaging me being like, I think this every day. And I don't know what to do with these feelings. Like, I don't know where to put it or process it. And having you share your story really made me feel like, oh, this is not just me. Like, this is on a industry-wide level. And so, yeah, I was really proud that I had the guts to do that, because it obviously helped a decent amount of people. And that's where the Bye Bye Burnout thing sort of bloomed from a little seed to this little idea of like, oh, well, maybe I should be talking about this more so that more people can kind of connect to it in a different way. And that's where it began.
I remember when you put out that post, and I remember being surprised because, so often in this industry, we're celebrating our successes. We're putting a happy, hot face out there into the world, or we're running into each other at celebrations and industry events and times where you're maybe not getting into the nitty gritty of, how are you really doing? There's a kind of a veneer over folks and the way that we represent ourselves sometimes in the industry. And so hearing, you talk about your experience and being really open and honest about it was so amazing and so nice to see that progress into the newsletter, where you kind of dive into some of that process of recognizing that you had this burnout and how you did that. And I'm wondering if you can share a bit about just the process of realizing that you were burnt out. I feel like sometimes we see there's like a fine line between success and burnout, because we're trying so hard. Like you just said, we're trying so hard to build up this career, and stuff like being busy all the time is kind of the thing that you've been trying to do in some ways, right? And so when did you kind of realize that maybe this was something else and something that could be a negative thing?
Wow. Well, thank you for saying all that, first of all. Secondly, I think it's so funny because truly the facade of the internet, this is also another thing I was very much going through, was my relationship to social media. And I hate that it's always like, let's boost ourselves, let's show all these positive things. And that's great. We should be sharing, accolades and really fun moments of our lives. But I also think that the really crappy parts of our lives and the things we're going through are equally as important. And the truth of it is that I was like miserable, like on the outside, seeing people at events or, talking to friends. Like you said, you were surprised. Like a lot of people didn't know that this was something I was going through or dealing with or suffering through. And, it's not something I was like sharing with a lot of people. And that's because we're human and we want to do our best and we want to try and do everything we can to succeed in whatever success looks like to each individual. But I was crying every night and I was not sleeping, and I had a hormone imbalance and my health was deteriorating. And that's where things really started to change and shift for me, because it wasn't just the pandemic. It wasn't just like stopping and reflecting. It was like my body was screaming at me to stop doing what I was doing. And I just kept resisting. Like this this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. Like, this is how we run on this hamster wheel. If we can't slow down, like, we have to keep going. And just that over and over for long periods of time was really starting to affect my body and my health. And that's when I was like, okay, it's not worth like losing my life or like risking my life for work. Like, it just isn't.
At this point, you're kind of immersed in this world of identifying burnout. Do you have tips for people who are, might find themselves in the same boat that you were, of how to, you were talking about a lot of physical and emotional symptoms. Can you have anything that you can share with folks of red flags or things to look out for that might indicate that they're on that same track?
Yeah, it's going to be different, obviously, for everybody, depending on the level of burnout and what you're doing. But for me, the signs I noticed was like my change in personality, my change in my happiness. Like, I was really easily agitated and frustrated, and I had a lot of anxiety, which is not something I normally dealt with. I love being around people. I love talking to people, and things really shifted for me where going out and talking to people was like the last thing I wanted to do. So things that I used to find joy in, I wasn't having fun doing it anymore. So it's sort of, you slip into this state, I think, of a bit of depression, not able to do the things you used to do or that you used to love to do. And I think like if you can find a way to listen to your body, if you can find a way to tap into how it's physically feeling, I think that was a really big one for me. As a Pisces, I have a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings, and I'm okay to admit that. But I'm not so great with like checking in with my body and physically expressing how my body is feeling. I'm all head and I'm all emotional, but I have a hard time tapping into like what my body's feeling, and then I have a hard time expressing what my body's feeling. So I think listening to how your body feels in a moment, like, does it get tense? Do you get hot? Do you get, like, all of these things are really important to pay attention to. And I think like finding out what your triggers are is another thing, because it's not like you deal with burnout all day, every day. There's certain things that might trigger it to be a little bit more intense. And the like stress response is a really big part of burnout. So I'm not a psychologist, so I can't like, deeply get into this. But from what I've learned in therapy and what I've learned in my readings is that the fight or flight response in today's society is so high that people actually can't come down from their stress response. So for example, like dogs and cats, when they get really anxious or whatever, they can shake and they release this stress and energy. But as humans, we don't really have a way to come down from stress besides like deep breathing, meditation, like all of that. And sometimes meditation and breathing doesn't work for people. Like some people can't actually get into a space of relaxation by just breathing because their mind is too busy. So as humans in today's society, we're just stressed all the time and we're never actually coming down from that stress. So it's like stress stacking on stress. And so like the tower just sort of keeps building until it either collapses or it's easily pushed down. And I think that it's important to make sure to take breaks and actually figure out what that release is for you. Because for me, it's songwriting and getting into like more therapy and going for walks and being in nature. And like those are my things to help release my stress and anxiety. But I think everyone's going to have something a little bit different. But definitely like listening to your body and how it's feeling is like the number one thing that you can do.
I recently, like yesterday, went for some massage therapy because my shoulder was just so messed up. And at the end of the time, I mentioned, like, do you ever do stuff on people's faces? Like, I feel like I've been clenching my jaw for 10 years. I feel like I have this like stress in my face, and the therapist was really nice. Like, yeah, let me check it out. And then was like, oh no, like she's like, this is like, I need an hour just to work on your jaw. It is so tense.
Wow.
Cool. So it wasn't just wasn't just me. It's these physical manifestations of anxiety and stress are so interesting because they're things that we sometimes don't even they're so hard to check in with, unless you're kind of forced to examine it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you were holding it in your jaw. I think that's like such a place to clench, especially in like the middle of the night, but everyone sort of holds it in different spaces in their body. And I find it so interesting that, in today's society where this like work hustle and like this culture of like, you got to do more than is expected is so unhealthy for us because we're not meant to be doing that all the time, every day. And of course our bodies are going to react and be like, yo, what are you doing? Like this doesn't feel good. I'm going to keep bugging you about this pain and until you do something about it. And it's like, it's so scary. Because no, your health is just not worth that. I don't think it is.
I have this feeling that, and it's one of the reasons why we created this podcast, and I feel like it's probably similar to why you started Bye Bye Burnout, is that like during the pandemic, we were all kind of forced to do that check-in a way because we were alone with ourselves and our bodies and our thoughts without the distraction of going anywhere. During that time, you've mentioned therapy in this conversation. Was that something that you were already involved in, or did that you seek that out when you kind of knew you were going through this stage of burnout?
Yeah, I had to seek it out. I was always very pro therapy. I still am. I think everyone should go to therapy. It's like the most helpful thing to be able to like talk out the things in your head and really reflect and see how you can just be kinder to yourself and then also other people in your surroundings. But I think it got to a point where the people in my life were being affected by my stresses and anxieties. And that's when I was like, this is not okay. Like, and I'm not okay. I think I tried to avoid that for a really long time. Like I tried to pretend I was fine, but I really had to just carve the time out to talk to somebody to figure out what to do with this and understand where it was coming from and why I was feeling the way I was or acting the way I was. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. My therapist wasn't like, you should quit your job. She never came out right out and said that. But as we talked more and more, it was the more I realized something that I absolutely had to do. And music supervision, it's still such a joy to me. I loved what I got to do, and I loved the people I got to work with. And it's heartbreaking to have to say goodbye to something you love for the better of your health. And it's the journey I sort of went through of like, I can't be my intuitive self and do this job at the same time. So I have to let go of the thing that's maybe not necessarily so healthy for me, even though I love it. And that really opened up my eyes to like, okay, this is the burnout I'm experiencing. I didn't realize I was experiencing it to the degree that I was. And a therapist just really helped me understand that, like, oh, what are all the things you're feeling? And this is where it's coming from, and et cetera.
And like, that's what I would call an incredibly brave choice, that you were able to make, to step away from something that was such a big part of your life and your goals that you had worked so hard on. Was there like a grieving process after that you had to go through, or was it more of an immediate, I'm done, I'm out?
Yeah, no, it was definitely a mourning process. I didn't think that I was going to experience that because I think I just needed relief and I needed to be done with it to start feeling better. So I, in my head, was like, this is going to be the thing that really helps me break this cycle. Like, this is what I need. And it was, but I definitely was not prepared for the mourning process as well, because it wasn't just me telling my colleagues and the people I worked with, like, okay, cool, it was nice working with you, but like, I'm making this decision. It was mourning a part of myself. Like, it was mourning a younger version of myself that was super excited about soundtracks and super excited to get into this industry, and a version of myself that worked 10 years to get to this point. So like that was honestly the hardest part more than anything. I feel like my identity was wrapped around this career. And so breaking that made me feel like I didn't know who I was anymore for a short while, which started the process. It started the process of me like figuring out who am I outside of supervision and my career, which is the exciting part.
It's so exciting. And it's, I mean, that experience can be, I think, applied to, I think a lot of folks in the industry have gone through, what you're describing, whether it's like breaking up your band and like doing something else, or, when you're kind of faced with a big transition like that, there should be like doulas for career transition.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing if that ever existed. Because it's so true. Like, I didn't have a backup plan. And so leaving a career and stability, not having something lined up, is terrifying. Like, that shift of change is taking a risk. Like, it's full on taking a risk. And not a lot of people are capable of doing that. Like, without having something lined up, without having some sense of where you're going to go next, is really scary. But I thrive in those moments in my life. Like, I fully love change when I need it. Like, it was like, no, this is time. I feel it in my bones. I'm not afraid. It's going to work out. Whatever is meant to be is going to sort of work itself out. And that's exactly what happened. You just have to sort of like take the leap and know that the net will appear.
And you said like, oh, I had to figure out who I was again, without that thing, right? But the neat thing is that inside there, you rediscovered Dondrea, the artist, and that connection to music was still there, and you were able to kind of pick that up. Do you want to speak a little bit about, starting to play again and getting back into life as an artist?
Yeah, like I said, when we first started talking, I grew up singing and songwriting, and that was a thing I've always loved to do and is me at my happiest. And I think when I started to get into supervision, my schedule and time didn't really allow for me to create in the same way. I think that that's like the start of probably the burnout for me, is I wasn't allowing myself to carve out time to create for myself. And so that closed that door completely off for me. So I didn't have my creative flow. I didn't have it go anywhere. It just sort of sat in me and was stagnant for a really long time. And I don't think that that was extremely healthy for me, but I also couldn't see myself ever feeling like I had the energy to create and want to do it. Like I didn't have the time or the energy to do it. So, stepping away from the career that I had built, I thankfully like still love music. Like, that's the best part, is I didn't lose my love for this world and the art and creating it and listening to it. I'm very grateful for that. Like, I'm not resentful towards the industry or music in general. If anything, it just allowed me to sort of open up that door again to my inner child and younger self, because that's really what fed me. And I said, oh yeah, this is what feels right. Like, it's sort of one of those things that just kept gnawing at me all the time. Like, oh, you're not doing this anymore. You're working in this industry now, but like, you're not really doing the thing that you love about it. Like, you need to do that. You need to do that. And I tried a couple of times. Like, I co-wrote with some friends and like recorded a couple things. And like a little butterfly in me was like, kind of flapping its wings, and I was feeling all excited. But then that never really went anywhere. And I couldn't put the energy and time and love into it that I wanted to. And so now I have that space to do that. I've created that space for myself. So I'm working in an environment now where I can close my computer at the end of the day and I don't have to like communicate or talk to anybody. This is my time now to like focus on art for myself. And that's what I think I needed, was to have this balance of like work life and creativity, and I just didn't have that on the scale. Supervision does not allow you to have a healthy work-life balance, unfortunately. So I had to create that for myself. And so now I'm kind of getting back into that, and I'm realizing like all of this that I've experienced is like really good inspiration to write pieces and to pull from, and it feels really good to be doing it again.
It's inspiring. It's inspiring to hear that by creating that boundary, and making those changes in your life so that you're able to put in some boundaries that like that creative part of yourself has room to grow and create and that it's, oh my God, I was about to say the butterfly got its wings, but that's not a thing.
I'm the one that cheesily threw that in there. It's fine.
You did. I'm all up on butterflies now. So what are you working on now then? Is there like a project that, are you just playing in your living room, or do you have something that you're kind of focusing on? And
okay, well, first of all, I do want to like be totally honest with my journey in this diving back into this pool, is that I'm really learning how to let go of like the inner critic in myself, because working in this industry for so long and listening to so many different types of music and ultimately trying to push it to film and television, I have a little bit of this like judgmental critic mindset and ego in my brain. And so right now I'm really practicing not caring about it, not caring about what the inner critic says, not caring what other people are going to think about my music. I'm literally doing this because I need to, and it feels good, and I want to do it. That's my main focus, number one. It's really hard to do that, but that's the beginning of this process. And I'm also trying to set mini goals for myself and write like a song a week with a couple people, and like either by myself or a co-write. And I'm working with a few people out here, co-writers and also producers, to open myself up into this world again. And I'm trying to take my time with it, and I'm not trying to make this like my next career. Like I'm not trying to have this be my moneymaker, because I don't want this pressure to be put on myself in a new environment. Like I'm entering this phase of I'm doing this because it feels good, and I don't want to put this pressure on myself to like have a press release and an album release and all this stuff. I want to do this really organically and naturally for myself. So I'm in that phase of trying to figure out how to do it myself and work with a couple people to get like tips and advice. And I've been recording and I want to put music out. So I'm hoping at some point this year, like I'm going to put a single out that's almost done. And then I'll either probably continue to release singles, or I'll put a demo out of some kind. But there's things that I want to incorporate like throughout those phases and steps that I've sort of been thinking about and racking in my brain that's going to intertwine this journey I've sort of been on. But I'm really excited about it, and it feels so good to be creating and making things again.
I'm excited about it. I can't wait to hear it. That's a pretty incredible, full circle place to be. But inside of that too, let's talk a little bit about the newsletter. So you've been putting out this newsletter. I get it coming into my inbox. Bye Bye Burnout. Was that from like Bye Bye Blackbird?
I was listening to Fifi Dobson for a while, and Bye Bye Boyfriend is like one of my favorite songs from her. And I think that is probably where it came from.
Okay, I just aged myself as like a person from the 1920s. Like I come and I hear like Bye Bye Blackbird, and you're like, no, this is a
Canadian icon Fifi Dobson.
Canadian icon Fifi Dobson by Boyfriend. That is much more current.
The ironic,
makes much more sense.
Yeah, the ironic thing is like the first newsletter I put out had that music video in the newsletter. And so I think that was definitely like the inspiration now that I think about it. It feels like so long ago since I started the first one. But yeah, and the newsletter itself just adapted. I was doing a newsletter a week, and then it felt that was like just way too much, not only for myself, but other people. I was like,
you can't burn yourself out on a newsletter about burnout. No. So then it burnout inception.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious and so true. Yeah, I think I sort of like created the boundary wherever I needed to. And I think now it's sort of like once a month or, bi-monthly. There's still a couple of other pieces I want to put out that I've like written down and started putting ideas together. But it's mainly from my experience as a supervisor. I've had a lot of newsletters that are music supervision specific. So talking about the one that really did well was a real life of a music supervisor. So I break down the like day to day of like what a music supervisor sort of has to deal with on the inside. And it's a lot of it supervisors don't talk about publicly. And I was like, no, I'm going to talk about this. I want this to be like a veil that's sort of removed, and I don't want this to be some secretive thing. Like, people need to understand why music supervisors don't get back to people, why they're super busy. And like, I also don't think this is healthy. And music supervisors just continue to do these habits and these things, and we're not really talking about it amongst each other or helping each other through the chaos of this industry. And so I was like, this is what happens. Like, this is how stressful it is and why it's so difficult and why it's not meant for everybody. Like, it's such a glorified job. There's a lot of people out there who are like, it's my dream to be a music supervisor. And I'm like, okay, if you read this newsletter and you don't feel slighted by it, then you'll be fine. But if there's anything in here that's triggering or sounds not fun, don't do it. Don't do it. But it's also for, I think, just anyone in the industry in general, like whether you're an artist or, I think I've had other people who aren't even in music who've read it and said that they can relate to certain things about it. It's more about how we can carve space out for ourselves, try to find a little bit of that work-life balance. It's like, how can we treat ourselves with kindness, and how can we not lose our inner child within ourselves? Like, how can we carve time out to like go skip it, like jump rope, or like go for walks in nature or painting? Like, how can we tap into the creative parts of ourselves and not feel like work is the only thing we do all day, every day?
I remember you did a newsletter about like play and about getting connected with nature. Can you go a bit more into that in terms of like ways to combat or deal with the stress, or how we can kind of center ourselves and the tools that you use?
Yeah, I think that when we get busy in work and in life, we don't do things for ourselves. We're doing things for other people all the time, that we don't stop to do things for ourselves. And I think to offset the burnout, we have to do things for ourselves in order to not experience it to the degree that I did. And so carving playful time out, and I think we can be playful as adults. I think that that's like so important and is a really big part of happiness and joy. And like, I keep bringing this up and throughout our conversations, but like learning how to tap into like our inner child and things that brought us peace, And I think that that's going to be different for everybody. For me, that was singing and songwriting and reading. I stopped reading books when I was supervising, and I am obsessed with reading. Like, I love books. So for me, it was like getting back into like finding time to read again. And whenever I carve that space out for myself, I'm happier afterwards. So it's like forcing ourselves to find the time rather than like make the time. We have to carve that time out for ourselves. It's so important. And nature is a really big one, because there's a screen everywhere we look, and there are advertisements and meetings and phone calls and emails and social media and all these things that distract us and keep us really busy. And the only thing I think that really breaks that habit and breaks that time from technology is truly being in nature, because it's not a simulation, believe it or not. It's not something that we can just go on YouTube and be like, I'm going to pull up nature sounds. It's like you actually can go outside and experience it in real time. And carving that time out can be difficult, but it's so refreshing, like breathing in fresh air, like putting your feet in the grass, like hearing birds, connecting with nature is such an important thing to release stress. And if we all did it a little bit more, we would feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Also, a part of me was like, okay, Dondrea, in LA, putting your feet in the grass as I stare out onto this icy, snow-covered, frigid tableau outside of my window. Grass sounds.
In the summertime, you can
nice.
Do that. In the summertime, you can do that.
Yes,
Maybe
absolutely.
you can put your feet in the snow and then go to a sauna. Like, there you go.
Oh my gosh. That sounds nice. That's it for this episode of Refocus. Please subscribe, rate, and review on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. For more information, you can visit us at folkmusicontario.org and follow us on social media at folkmusicontario. This Refocus session is brought to you through the generous support of the Department of Canadian Heritage.